Hello again, my fiber friends. I'm ReRe, and this is Exploration Crochet, part of the Yarn Over Hook network. In the fall of 2024, my son Roman founded Yarn Over Hook. He didn't know how to crochet. He focused on strategy, business, and technology while leaving the stitching to me and my daughter Sammy. On June 12th of this year, Roman published his first crochet pattern. Within 2 weeks, he had moved 20 copies. Granted, it was free, but still. 20 people wanted Roman's skinny scarf trademark. The pattern includes an official certificate of skinny scarf completion, and the design is simple. 1 chain, 503 times, 503 stitches. Why 503? Because he accidentally miscounted on one of his groups of 50 and decided, instead of frogging back 3 stitches, the additional 3 felt more bespoke. And honestly, that is so crochet. I have helped a lot of people on their crochet journeys, children, adults, some brand new, and some just wanting to expand their hook world. And one thing I've noticed is that it is rare for someone to charge ahead with no hesitation. Most people pause at the edge. So this week, we're talking about something every crocheter knows: the fear of the first chain. Because for some people, learning to crochet does not begin with a hook, it begins with hesitation. They buy the yarn, they pick the pattern, they save the tutorial. They may even put the hook and skein into a cute little project bag. They are ready. And then, nothing. Because the first chain is not just a chain. Sometimes it feels like an indictment. Am I creative? Am I coordinated? Am I patient? Am I too old to learn? Am I going to look foolish? That is a lot of emotional freight to put on one little slip knot. So we're going to talk about fear, mistakes, frogging, and how crochet can become a gentle training ground for courage. Because the first chain doesn't ask you to be perfect. It only asks you to begin. Let's start with fear of failure. The Cleveland Clinic describes aticophobia as an intense fear of negative evaluation or failure. A fear that can make people avoid activities where an unsuccessful outcome is possible. Most nervous beginners do not necessarily have a clinical phobia, but the pattern is recognizable. Fear can make people avoid the very thing they want to do. And fear often sounds reasonable on the surface. Fear knows how to dress itself up as practicality. Sometimes, I'm researching means I'm delaying. I'm waiting until I'm ready means I'm afraid to be a beginner. I'm not crafty means I tried something once and it made me feel bad about myself. That matters because the fear is rarely just about the thing itself. It is about what we think the thing will reveal. If my first row is crooked, I am not a crocheter. Now, let's pause and be honest. The first row is usually crooked. The first chain is often either too tight, too loose, twisted, just unstable. And that is completely normal. But perfectionism does not think it's normal. Perfectionism thinks the first attempt is an audition. And fear whispers, do not audition, stay safe. Do not begin. Somewhere along the way, a person may have absorbed the idea that some people are just crafty and some people are not. But crochet is not an identity you must prove before you begin. Crochet is a skill you build by doing it. A crocheter is not someone whose first stitch was perfect. A crocheter is someone who continued making stitches. Fear is not only a thought, it's a physical experience. Harvard Health explains that when we face danger or stress, the brain and body can launch into a fight, flight, or freeze response, even when the danger is emotional or psychological. And to be clear, crochet is not a tiger, usually, but the brain can respond to embarrassment, shame, frustration, uncertainty, and judgment as if physical danger is present. So when a beginner sits down with yarn and hook, the actual task may seem small, but the emotional task may feel enormous. What if I can't do it? What if everybody else gets it faster? What if I ask a stupid question? What if my hands don't cooperate? Suddenly, the person is not simply learning crochet. They're trying to survive the feeling of being exposed. That is when fear becomes paralyzing. Some people fight and get angry at the pattern, the hook, or the tutorial. Some people flee and decide crochet is just not for them. Others freeze, sitting with the supplies and tutorials, just unable to start. This is why just start isn't always helpful advice. For someone who is afraid, just start can sound like just jump. And what they need is not pressure so much as safety. Avoidance is one of fear's favorite tools because it works immediately. If trying crochet makes me anxious and I avoid trying crochet, my anxiety goes down. That relief teaches my brain avoiding helped. So next time, I avoid again. Not because I don't want to crochet, but because avoiding has become the easiest way to feel safe. Modern beginners are also learning in a world of perfect images. On Instagram, you see people standing on all sorts of things unfurling finished blankets. YouTube shows the pretty nails and confident hands. TikTok shows the speed crocheter making a cardigan before the coffee gets cold. And the beginner looks down at their first chain and thinks, mine does not look like that. Of course it doesn't. You are comparing your first 5 minutes to someone else's 5,000 hours. The internet hides the messy middle. And because we don't see the learning process, we start to believe skill arrives fully formed. It does not. Skill is grown, stitch by stitch, mistake by mistake, frog by frog. And depending upon your temperament, swear word by swear word. The cure for fear is not try harder. Fear needs safety, evidence, and repetition. If the fear is, I will fail, then we need to make failure survivable. If the fear is, I will look stupid, then we need to make beginnerhood normal. If the fear is, I cannot do this, then we need tiny pieces of evidence that show they can. A slip knot, a chain, a row. A mistake noticed without despair. A project returned to after frustration. That is how fear begins to loosen its grip. So, how do we begin when fear says, don't? Pressure does not work. Fear needs a way out. So here are 3 practical steps. Step 1, deconstruct the skill. Strip crochet down to its simplest possible pieces. In learning theory, there's a concept called cognitive load. Our working memory can only handle so much new information at once, and crochet is full of cognitive load in the beginning. You're holding the hook, and you're holding the yarn. You're controlling the tension, or trying to. You're watching the loop. You're listening to instructions. You're trying to remember whether yarn over means the yarn goes over the hook or the hook over the yarn. That is a lot. So lower the load. Don't try to learn crochet all at once. Learn one tiny piece, which is exactly what Roman did. He decided to master the chain. and the Yarn Over Hook community celebrated that. So with beginners, I don't focus too much on the perfect way to hold the yarn. I focus on getting the yarn on the hook and pulling a loop through. The goal is chains. Make 5 chains. Pull them out. Make 10 chains. Pull them out. Make 20 chains. And keep going. We're all working together. I'm making chains, they're making chains, I'm frogging, they're frogging. This is not wasted effort. This is the brain, the hands, and the yarn building a relationship. The point is not the object. The point is that you're learning how to talk to yarn. The resulting snake is just the cherry on top. Step 2. Reframe mistakes as data. This is where shifting from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset is important. Stanford Teaching Commons describes a growth mindset as seeing challenges and setbacks as opportunities to learn and persist. A fixed mindset says, I am bad at this. A growth mindset says, I'm new at this. A fixed mindset says, my edge is uneven, so I must not be a creative person. A growth mindset says, my edge is uneven, so something changed in my stitch count or tension or something. That uneven edge is not a moral failing. It's data. That dropped stitch is not evident that you are unworthy. It's data. That chain that starts loose and slowly becomes tighter, data. Crochet gives feedback. Sometimes the feedback is ugly, but it is still feedback. If your chain is too tight, the yarn is saying there's too much tension. If your row is getting wider, the project is saying you may be adding stitches. If your row is getting narrower, the project is saying you may be skipping stitches. That is not shame, that is information, and information can be used. And finally, step 3, embrace the frog. Beginners need to know this early. Frogging is not a sign of disaster. Frogging is not shameful. Frogging is not proof that you should quit. Frogging is part of crochet. Experienced crocheters frog. Frogging is not the opposite of progress. It is a part of the process. It is how crochet lets us revise. And that is one of the quieter gifts of the craft. The yarn lets us begin again. So if fear says, do not start unless you can do it perfectly, crochet answers, start anyway. We can always frog it back and try again. Now let's make this even more practical. If you're a beginner who feels frozen, do not begin with a project. Begin with a 5-minute appointment. For 5 minutes, hold the hook and yarn, make slip knots and chains. When the timer ends, you are allowed to stop. This matters because fear often inflates the size of the task. Beginning does not have to be big. Beginning can be 5 minutes. If 5 minutes goes well, maybe tomorrow you do 7. If it goes badly, you still did 5. That is evidence. Fear said you could not start, and you started. The project does not have to be good for that to matter. And when you're ready for a first actual project, please allow that project to be free of emotional entanglements. Remember, learning is hard. Learning has never been easy. So make something small for yourself or maybe for your pet. Your first project should be allowed to be ugly. Because once the goal becomes practice instead of perfection, fear loses a lot of its power. A good beginner project is not the project that proves you're talented. A good beginner project is the project that teaches you to come back, to continue. A dishcloth, a coaster, a scarf for a stuffed animal, a tiny square that never has to justify its existence. A rectangle that says, I was here, I learned something. That is enough. Now, let's talk about what crochet can give back. There is a study with a great title: Happy Hookers: Findings from an International Study Exploring the Effects of Crochet on Well-Being. The study was published in Perspectives in Public Health and gathered about 8,400 valid responses from crocheters in 87 countries. Many respondents reported that crochet made them feel calmer, happier, and more useful. Now, let's be factual. This was survey based research. It does not prove that crochet changes brain chemistry, and it is not a replacement for therapy, medication, medical care, or anything else a person may need. But what it does tell us is something important. Many crocheters experience crochet as calming, creative, relaxing, and satisfying. And I know for folks who have been crocheting a while, calming and relaxing isn't always the case. Frustration, confusion, irritation, but still we rise. And that is a beautiful thing, especially when placed beside the fear of beginning. Because the very thing a beginner may fear to start, the hook, the yarn, the imperfect first chain, may become one of the things that helps them feel calmer once they let go of being perfect. Fear says, do not begin until you feel confident. But crochet may work the other way. You don't wait for confidence and then make the chain. You make the chain awkwardly, imperfectly, and confidence begins to grow from the evidence. One loop, one stitch, one tiny bit of proof that fear did not get the final word. For someone who has been afraid to try, a crooked first swatch can become evidence of bravery. Not because it's beautiful, but just because it exists. Now I want to say something to experienced crocheters, to teachers, shop owners, and well-meaning family members. How we talk to beginners really matters. When someone is afraid to try, they are listening for danger. They are listening for judgment. They're listening for signs that they do not belong. And unfortunately, fiber spaces can sometimes be intimidating. If a beginner walks into a yarn shop and feels dismissed because they crochet instead of knit, that matters. If someone asks a basic question online and gets sarcasm instead of help, that matters. People don't just remember what they are taught, they remember how they felt while learning. So if you want more people to crochet, we have to make room for beginners to be beginners. We have to stop treating confusion as a character flaw. We have to stop treating mistakes as evidence that someone is not cut out for the craft. And we have to stop guarding crochet like it's a gated community. Crochet has always traveled through hands. It belongs to anyone willing to pick up the hook. And sometimes the most generous thing an experienced crocheter can say is, mine looked like that at first too. That sentence can save a beginner because it tells them they are not uniquely untalented. They are simply new. Supportive teaching sounds like, now this part takes practice, or your hands are learning. That mistake is common. And your first row is just doing first row things. A good crochet community does not only celebrate finished objects, it celebrates attempts. It celebrates first chains. It celebrates lumpy squares, and the person who came to class nervous and left only knowing how to yarn over. Crochet happens in the awkward beginning. The uneven tension, the counting and recounting, the mistake you didn't notice until 3 rows later, and the decision to keep going. This is why crochet is such a powerful metaphor for courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is making the chain while fear is still in the room. Courage is saying, this may be messy, but I'm doing it anyway. Courage is letting the first attempt be just that, a first attempt. Courage is not waiting until you're certain you will succeed. Courage is giving yourself enough kindness to learn. Now let's speak directly to the person who wants to crochet but has not begun. Maybe you have the yarn already. Maybe it's still in the bag. Maybe you bought it 3 months ago or 3 years ago. Maybe you have been telling yourself that someday you will learn. Here is what I want you to know. You are allowed to start badly. You are allowed to start slow. You are allowed to forget and allowed to ask the same question more than once. You are allowed to make a chain and pull it apart. You are allowed to need the beginner tutorial, even if the title says absolute beginner and somehow still assumes you were born knowing how to yarn over. You are allowed to learn in 5-minute pieces. You are allowed to become a crocheter without being, quote unquote, naturally gifted. Because most of crochet is not talent. Most of crochet is return. You return to the stitch, the row. You return after a mistake, after frustration. And eventually, all those returns build skill. So, here is your beginner's permission slip. You do not have to make something useful today. You do not have to make something pretty today. You do not have to understand the whole pattern today. Today, you only have to make one chain. And if one chain is too much, make a slip knot. If a slip knot is too much, just hold the yarn. And if holding the yarn is all you do today, then today you met the craft at the door. And that counts. Because beginning is not always dramatic. Beginning is quiet, clumsy. Beginning is saying, I feel ridiculous and here I go. Beginning is making something so ugly you immediately give it a name. But beginning matters because it is proof. Proof that fear did not get the final word. So, going back to Roman's skinny scarf, trademark, yes, it started out as a gag, but Roman's skinny scarf is an endearing part of yarn over hook lore. So to every would-be crocheter standing at the edge of the craft, don't be afraid to begin. Whatever you make doesn't have to be great, it only needs to exist. Because once it exists, you are no longer standing outside the craft. You're in it. And if you're a Bob's Burgers fan, I encourage you to revisit Season 9, Episode 10, Better Off Sled, where Linda, who's only ever thought about knitting, decided to make the kids scarves for Christmas in 2 days. And if you're looking for a community that will celebrate even your smallest wins, I'd like to invite you to join Yarn Over Hook. To quote Roman and his skinny scarf pattern, one of the things we believe at Yarn Over Hook is that every crocheter starts differently. Some begin with blankets, some amigurumi, some jump straight into garments. And some of us get really comfortable making chains. Yarn Over Hook exists because crochet deserves a place where makers can create, learn, and connect. If this episode made you think of someone who wants to learn to crochet but is afraid to start, send it to them. Tell them they don't have to be good. They only have to begin. And if that person is you, consider this your official invitation. Pick up the hook. Make the chain. And if you want a great pattern that is guaranteed to make you feel validated and encouraged, pick up the free Roman skinny scarf pattern. I'll leave the link in the show notes. Thank you so very much for listening. This has been Exploration Crochet.